They laughed when the British rolled out their tornadoes, flying bricks. The Americans called them heavy, outdated strike bombers from another era, no match for the sleek F-16 Falcons. But on a crisp Adriatic morning, in an exercise meant to prove that very point, the laughter died in the headset. One by one, the tornadoes turned the hunters into prey. By the time the skies fell silent, 5 Falcons had been declared killed, and the legend of Britain's most underestimated jet was born. The laughing hangar, the cavernous hangar at Aviano Air Base, smelled of jet fuel and machine oil, a blend that seemed permanent, ground into the concrete after years of NATO exercises. Sunlight spilled in through the open doors, reflecting off the polished noses of the F-16 fighting Falcons lined up like a row of blades, sleek, compact, and lethal-looking. They seemed every bit the symbol of modern air power. To the American pilots, their machines weren't just aircraft, they were an identity. The F-16 was fast, agile, and combat-tested across decades. They wore their confidence openly, like a second flight suit. And when their allies from the Royal Air Force rolled in with their tornadoes, the contrast was too easy to mock. Compared to the Falcon's sharp elegance, the Tornado GR4 looked clumsy. Its variable geometry wings seemed awkward, its fuselage wide and heavy, its stance on the tarmac almost lumbering. One American lieutenant, barely out of flight school, smirked and muttered, "Looks like a bomber mated with a school bus." His wingman laughed. "Careful, don't scratch the antiques," another quipped as a tornado was towed past. The chuckles carried across the hangar, meant to sting. The British aircrews ignored it. They had long ago grown accustomed to the ridicule. For decades, the Tornado had been branded everything from a flying brick to the last Cold War dinosaur. Designed in the 1970s for low-level strike missions, it had never inspired the same glamour as a nimble dogfighter. But those who flew it knew its value. Beneath its heavy frame lay advanced avionics, jamming systems, and the unique advantage of 2 crewmen who could split the crushing workload of modern combat. Squadron leader James "Hawk" Halford adjusted his gloves and watched the Americans with quiet amusement. He had flown tornadoes through Iraq's radar-choked skies, dodging missiles at treetop level, striking targets and vanishing before the enemy knew they were there. Mockery didn't bother him. Overconfidence did. He leaned toward his backseater, Flight Lieutenant Mason, and muttered just loud enough for him to hear, "Let them laugh. Tomorrow we'll give them something to remember." The Americans continued to joke, oblivious. They thought the Tornado was a relic, a lumbering beast outclassed by the Falcon's speed. But the Sky, Halford knew, didn't care about reputations. The Sky cared about tactics, and soon the exercise would prove it. The briefing. The operations room was a theater of tension disguised as routine. A giant screen dominated the front wall, glowing with maps of the Adriatic. Colored grids marked simulated hostile zones, while white lines traced the boundaries of NATO's exercise airspace. Rows of pilots in flight suits filled the seats, their helmets resting on the desks before them like waiting masks. Colonel Reynolds, exercise commander, stepped up to the podium with the kind of self-assurance that only years in the cockpit could breed. He adjusted the microphone and cleared his throat. "Gentlemen, ladies," he began, "welcome to Exercise Iron Tempest. Today we test our readiness against modern threats. Blue team," he gestured toward, "the rows of Americans will fly defensive intercepts. Red team," his hand moved toward the small British contingent, "will attempt to break through and strike assigned targets." The display shifted, showing 16 blue icons forming defensive arcs. Then 4 red icons appeared at the opposite edge of the map. The mismatch was obvious. Murmurs rippled through the American ranks. 1-6 versus 4, whispered a captain in the second row, grinning. "That's not a fight, that's a turkey shoot." The RAF pilots sat still, faces unreadable. Reynolds continued outlining the rules. Simulated missile envelopes, kill notifications transmitted via YC's altitude restrictions for safety. The engagement begins at 0900 hours. All aircraft will be tracked, all maneuvers logged. At the end, we'll review the results. Remember, it's an exercise, not a brawl. He paused, letting the smirk tug at his lips. "So don't embarrass your allies too badly." Laughter erupted across the room. Hawk Halford sat in silence, studying the projected map. He noted the ridgelines where radar coverage faltered, the valleys where terrain masking could hide them. The Tornado was not built to outturn or outclimb an F-16, but it didn't need to. He scribbled a quick set of notes: altitude bands, approach vectors, jamming bursts. Mason leaned close and whispered, "Odds are stacked, sir." Alfred's reply was calm, almost amused. "Odds are just math. Tactics win fights." When the briefing ended, the Americans rose noisily, joking and nudging each other about how quickly the exercise would end. The British crews filed out quietly, boots echoing on the polished floor. No words, no arguments. They didn't need to defend their aircraft in the briefing room. The Sky would settle it. Steel on the runway. The dawn air over Aviano was cool and crisp, but the flight line was already alive with the roar of engines and the buzz of ground crews. Orange-vested mechanics darted between hulking aircraft, tugging hoses, checking panels, and making last-minute adjustments with the precision of a pit crew. The Tornadoes sat at the far end of the tarmac, their gray camouflage blending into the morning haze. The morning haze. Inside, Tornado 206 Squadron Leader Halford ran through his checklist with methodical calm. His gloved hand flicked switches, bringing the cockpit alive with green lights. Behind him, Mason scanned the displays, verifying radar alignment, jamming sweep readiness, and the mock missile systems wired for the exercise. INS calibrated, weapons simulation green, ECM active standby. Mason called out. Engine stable. Fuel full load, Halford replied. He could feel the faint vibration of the twin RB199 turbofans beneath his seat, steady, reliable, powerful in a way that the Tornado's detractors rarely appreciated. Across the airfield, the F-16s came to life with a higher-pitched whine, almost impatient. American crews swaggered in and out of their cockpits, some exchanging thumbs up with mechanics, others making jokes over the open comms. One voice carried across the channel. "Hope you Brits packed your tea bags. You'll be out of this fight before breakfast." The laughter that followed was loud enough to cut through the static. Halford ignored it. Instead, he looked down the taxiway, visualizing the low-level ingress they'd soon attempt. The Tornado's strength was not in dueling up high, but in skimming under radar nets, exploiting valleys, using its brute speed at treetop height. He intended to remind everyone of that fact. Red lead, cleared for taxi, the tower called. Halford eased the throttles forward. The Tornado began to roll, heavy but steady, its broad nose slicing the haze. 3 more followed in tight sequence, forming a line of steel down the taxiway. From a distance they looked less like sleek predators and more like armored beasts lumbering toward war. Then came the takeoff. Halford slammed the throttles into afterburner. The engines thundered, the aircraft jolted forward, and within seconds the Tornado surged into the air, wings sweeping back as it clawed into the sky. One by one, the other GR-4s followed, their engines rattling windows across the base. High above, the Falcons were already circling, radar sweeping like searchlights, confident, waiting. Halford dipped his nose toward the coastline, dropping low, hugging the terrain where radar faltered. Mason grinned behind his visor. "They'll never see us coming. Hunt begins." At 20,000 feet, Captain Ryan Viper Keller scanned his radar display with casual confidence. His F-16 streaked in a wide orbit above the Adriatic, the sunlight glinting off its canopy. Below, the sea shimmered like glass. "Blue Squadron, maintain the screen." The AWACS controller's voice crackled through his headset. "Red aircraft are expected to ingress from the west. Be advised, for bogeys low probability of survival." That last line drew laughter across the frequency. Keller smirked. He had flown countless exercises, and nothing ever challenged the Falcon's dominance. The Tornado, in his mind, was an outdated mud mover, dangerous only to ground targets. In the air, it was slow prey. "Copy that," he replied. "We'll keep the sky clean." Yet, as the minutes ticked by, the radar picture remained stubbornly empty. 4 red contacts should have appeared on the scope, but there was nothing but static and the faint echo of sea clutter. "Control, confirm red force launch?" Keller asked. "Affirmative," AWACS replied. 4 Tornadoes airborne, 5 minutes ago. "Then where the hell are they?" The answer was simple. They were already below him. Halford's Tornado skimmed the coastline at 600 knots. Though low, the spray from the sea occasionally misted the canopy. Mason worked the radar in passive mode, feeding bursts of jamming noise into the ether. The F-16s above were blinded by electronic ghosts, phantom blips that danced on their screens, misleading them into chasing shadows. "Blue 2 to lead. I've got a contact, bearing 175 low. Wait, negative. It's gone." "Blue 4. Same here." Radar, spike, then nothing. Frustration built. The Falcon pilots, used to clean radar locks and swift kills, were now chasing specters. Their neat defensive line began to fray as jets peeled off in pursuit of false returns. Inside Tornado 206, Mason grinned as he watched the electronic trickery unfold. "They're swatting at flies," he muttered. Halford kept his eyes forward, hugging the contours of the land. He knew the Americans were growing impatient. That was part of the plan. Overconfidence was a weapon, one he fully intended to turn against them. Then Mason's voice sharpened. "Single contact, 12 o'clock, low altitude. One of them dove too far." Halford's lips curled into a thin smile. "Time to introduce ourselves." The hunt had begun. The first kill. Captain Keller's wingman, Lieutenant Briggs, broke formation and dropped altitude to chase the flickering radar return. His F-16 plunged like a hawk, nose down, wings flexing as he pushed toward the low blip that kept dancing on his scope. "Blue 2, tighten it up," Keller warned. "Don't go chasing ghosts." "I've got this one. Lead," Briggs replied. Cocky, he's toast. But the blip wasn't a ghost, it was Halford. From 200 feet above the sea, Tornado 206 surged forward, hugging the waves until Mason gave the nod. "Target in range. Lock solid." Halford pulled gently on the stick, the Tornado rising just enough to bring the F-16 into their sights. Mason's thumb hovered over the simulation trigger. "Fox 3, he called. pressing down in the simulated battle network. The AWACS controller's voice cut in sharp and official. Kill confirmed. Blue 2, you are down. Silence followed. For a long moment, the radio was empty except for static. Then Keller's incredulous voice broke through. Say again. Control. Blue 2 has been splashed. Remove yourself from the exercise. A WACS repeated. Briggs swore. No way. They never even. His voice cut off as he banked away, climbing reluctantly out of the fight. Silence followed. For a long moment, the radio was empty except for static. Then Keller's incredulous voice broke through. Say again. Control. Blue 2 has been splashed. Remove yourself from the exercise. A WACS repeated. Briggs swore. No way. They never even. His voice cut off as he banked away, climbing reluctantly out of the fight. He wasn't wrong. Above them, the Falcons tightened formation, voices overlapping across the comms. Some demanded to know how the kill had been made. Others insisted the AWACS system had glitched, but the truth gnawed at them. They'd underestimated their opponents. Halford leveled the tornado back at treetop height, his eyes scanning the horizon for the next opening. The Americans were hunting harder now, but in their haste, they were breaking formation. Exactly what he wanted. 3 left to go, Mason said quietly. Halford corrected him with the hint of a grin. No. 4 left for us. 12 left for them. The fight was only beginning. Tornado tactics. The Americans were flying angry now. The first kill had shocked them, but the second left their comms buzzing with clipped words and sharp edges. Their once fluid formation was beginning to look ragged, stretched thin by frustration and pride. Blue Squadron, keep it tight, Keller ordered, trying to bring order back. We've got numbers. Don't let them drag you low. But Halford was already dragging them low. Tornado 206 cut across the valley, hugging the contours so tightly that Mason's stomach threatened to rebel. The jet thundered between ridgelines, nearly invisible to the Falcons overhead. Contact 2 of them, 3 o'clock. Mid-altitude, Mason reported. Halford grinned beneath his mask. Evans, you're up. On the far flank, Tornado 214 burst from its hiding place. Flight Lieutenant Evans pushed his jet into a climbing turn, climbing just high enough to spike the unsuspecting F-16 pair above him. His backseater Grant locked quickly. Fox 2, the AWACS voice was immediate. Kill confirmed. Blue 8, you are down. One Falcon peeled away in simulated death. The other panicked, banking too hard, too fast. That was all the opening Halford needed. Tornado 206 roared up from the valley floor, Mason painting the second Falcon with a lock before its pilot even registered the threat. Fox 3, Mason declared. Kill confirmed. Blue 10, you are down. Cheers erupted on the red team channel, though Halford's voice cut through with steady command. Focus, we've bloodied them, but they'll be hunting smarter now. High above, Keller cursed under his breath for kills. For Falcons wiped out by jets his squadron had dismissed as obsolete. Damn it, he muttered. They're using the terrain, hiding, ambushing. Stop playing their game. But his warning came too late. The Tornadoes were fighting like wolves, using teamwork, patience, and electronic trickery to control the pace of the battle. One would bait, diving into radar range, while another lurked unseen to deliver the kill. The F-16s, trained for speed and agility, weren't prepared for prey that fought like predators for the first time in the exercise. The numbers didn't seem to matter. The Tornadoes were dictating the fight. The turning tide, high above the Adriatic, the American formation was unraveling. The clean, disciplined web of F-16s that had looked invincible on the briefing map now looked frayed and uneven. Gaps yawning where downed pilots had been forced to withdraw. Halford's Tornado thundered low along a ridgeline, its wings swept back as it streaked inland. Mason kept his eyes glued to the console, the screens awash with blips and reels, many false, all distorted by the ECM. They're scattered, he reported, pairs breaking off, chasing shadows. Exactly what we wanted. Halford pulled the Tornado into a climbing turn, punching through a gap in the terrain. For a brief moment, the jet's nose pointed skyward, and Mason seized the opportunity. Lock. Blue contact at 10 o'clock, range 8 miles. Fox 2, Mason announced, loosing another simulated missile. Seconds later, AWACS confirmed. Kill confirmed. Blue 9, you are down. Another Falcon vanished from the fight. Up above, the American comms grew more frantic. Control, how the hell are they doing this? One pilot demanded. Another snapped back. They're hiding in the weeds. Stay high. Keep your eyes open. But the advice came too late. On the far flank, Tornado 214, flown by Flight Lieutenant Evans and his backseater Grant, popped up from the valleys like a phantom before the F-16s above could react. Evans angled into their 6 o'clock and Mason's counterpart locked the shot. AWACS called another kill. Blue 11, out of play. On the far flank, Tornado 214, flown by Flight Lieutenant Evans and his backseater Grant, popped up from the valleys like a phantom before the F-16s above could react. Evans angled into their 6 o'clock and Mason's counterpart locked the shot. AWACS called another kill. Blue 11, out of play. Blue Squadron, tighten it up, he barked. No more chasing ghosts. Regroup on me. We hunt them together. Blue Squadron, tighten it up, he barked. No more chasing ghosts. Regroup on me. We hunt them together. But even as he spoke, another tornado darted through a gap in the terrain, low and fast, vanishing again before anyone could line up a shot. The Falcons had speed, agility, altitude, but the tornadoes had something deadlier: patience, teamwork, and the element of surprise. The tide had turned, and the Americans were beginning to realize it. The final clash. Captain Ryan Viper Keller had had enough. 4 of his Falcons had been declared down, and the rest were scattered, chasing radar ghosts while the tornadoes slipped in and out of the valleys like specters. His pride was bleeding. Blue Squadron, on me, he snapped into the comms. No more solo hunts. We form a war, we flush them out, and we kill them. One by one, the remaining F-16s fell into position, forming a layered shield across the valley mouth. Their radars swept furiously, their eyes straining for the faintest sign of gray wings against the terrain. But Halford was already inside the wall. Tornado 206 tore along the valley floor at 600 knots. So low the altimeter's warning tone was a constant chirp in Mason's ears. He ignored it, focused on the faint contacts ahead. Multiple bandits 4 o'clock high. They've stacked up. Halford's voice was calm. They're waiting for us. Then let's not keep them waiting. He pulled back on the stick, the tornado climbing hard out of the valley. In an instant, the jet burst into the Falcon's kill zone. Warnings shrieked in the cockpit as radar locks painted them from multiple angles. Fox 3, Keller called, simulating a missile shot. 2 other Falcons echoed him. Break, Halford barked, rolling the tornado hard left. Mason thumbed the jamming suite, flooding the air with noise. On Keller's radar, the lock blinked, then vanished. Where the Keller growled. Mason grinned. Their shots are blind. We're still alive. Before the Falcons could reset, Tornado 214 screamed up on their flank. Evans' voice came sharp over the red team channel. Fox 2, Splash 1, AWACS confirmed. Another F-16 out. Halford seized the chaos. He swung Tornado 206 onto the tail of a Falcon that had overshot its turn. Mason's locked tone bled. Got him. Fox 3. Seconds later, kill confirmed. Blue 5, you are down. The radio exploded with American voices: disbelief, frustration, anger. 2 more F-16s had fallen. Now it was Keller alone at the center of the maelstrom, his squadron shredded. He pulled his Falcon into a tight climb, sweat beading on his forehead. Red lead, Mason said quietly. That makes 5. Halford allowed himself a thin smile. Message received. The sky, once filled with American laughter, was suddenly very quiet. Aftermath in the sky. The Adriatic airspace, once alive with chatter, had fallen into an uneasy silence. The roar of engines remained, but on the radios the bravado had evaporated. Only the clipped official voice of the AWACS controller broke the quiet. Exercise terminated. Red team has achieved strike penetration with 5 confirmed kills. All blue aircraft, disengage and return to base. The words seemed to hang in the ether. For a moment, no one replied. The Americans couldn't quite process it. 16 Falcons against 4 tornadoes, and yet nearly a third of their force had been declared out before the strike corridor was breached. Captain Keller slammed a gloved fist against the side of his cockpit. Unbelievable, he muttered, though his microphone had been left open. How the hell did they do it? From another Falcon came a bitter reply. They cheated. Had to. No way a tornado takes down 5 F-16s. But a wax was merciless. All kills verified within simulation parameters. No anomalies detected. Keller ground his teeth, throttling back as he pointed his jet toward Aviano. The shame burned hotter than the afterburner ever could. He had mocked them. They all had. And now, the scoreboard was carved in stone for everyone to see. Down low, Halford eased Tornado 206 back to cruising altitude, finally letting the altimeter breathe above the treetops. Mason was grinning behind his mask, but Halford remained composed, eyes scanning the horizon even though the fight was over. 5 kills, Mason said, his voice almost reverent. Not bad for a flying brick. Halford finally allowed himself a chuckle. Not bad at all. The other tornadoes regrouped in formation, their silhouettes solid and steady against the fading sky. Together, they turned back toward base, flying not with arrogance, but with the quiet pride of men who had proved a point. Over the common channel, an American pilot finally broke the silence. His voice was flat, grudging, but honest. Red team. Well flown. It wasn't much, but it was the first crack in the wall of mockery. The tornadoes had not just survived the exercise, they had dominated it. And now, back on the ground, the reckoning would come. Debrief and respect. The briefing room at Aviano was tense, a heavy silence filling the space as pilots shuffled into their seats. The Americans sat in the front rows, arms crossed, eyes fixed ahead. The tornado crews slipped in quietly, carrying themselves without swagger. They didn't need it. The scoreboard told the story. On the large screen, AWACS had compiled the exercise results. 5 F-16s down, 0 tornadoes lost. Red team strike successful. A murmur rippled through the room. Someone coughed, another shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Colonel Matthews, the exercise director, stood at the podium. His expression was professional, but his eyes carried a trace of amusement. Well, gentlemen, I think it's safe to say today's engagement didn't go as some of you predicted. Laughter brief awkward ran through the room. Keller didn't smile. He stared at the screen, jaw tight. 5 kills, Matthews continued, by aircraft that, by all accounts, shouldn't have stood a chance. Yet the record shows otherwise. Red team used terrain, teamwork, and electronic warfare to full effect. They stayed disciplined while Blue Squadron grew reckless. He let the words hang. That, gentlemen, is how wars are won, not by mockery, but by execution. At the back, Mason leaned toward Halford. Did he just call us disciplined? He whispered with a grin. Halford smirked but said nothing. Finally, Matthews gestured toward the RAF crews. Let's give credit where it's due. The room clapped, hesitant at first, then more firmly. Even Keller, after a pause, added a few stiff claps. When the applause faded, he turned in his chair. His eyes met Halford's across the room. For a heartbeat, the tension held. Then Keller gave the faintest of nods. Not surrender, not friendship, just acknowledgement. Outside the debrief, the Tornado crew stepped into the evening air. The mountains were fading into dusk, their peaks glowing red in the last light. Mason exhaled, the grin still on his face. So, he said, do you think they'll still call it a flying brick? Halford glanced at the sky where the Falcons had flown so high and fallen so hard. Maybe, he said, but now they'll say it with respect. The Tornadoes had been mocked, underestimated, written off as relics, but on that day they had written their own answer in the sky, 1 kill at a time. And nobody laughed again.